The letter clutched in Catherine Riley's gloved hand had turned damp from the snow melting against her wool coat, the ink bleeding until the address was barely readable. And she stood alone on the wooden platform of a train station she had never heard of, while the last wisps of steam from the departing locomotive disappeared into the gray winter sky of 1882. She had been supposed to arrive in Silver Springs, Nevada, where her intended husband Samuel Garrett awaited her arrival, a man she knew only through 3 carefully worded letters and a single daguerreotype showing a stern face beneath a dark hat. But somewhere between Carson City and her destination, she had fallen asleep in the cramped passenger car, exhausted from 3 weeks of travel that had carried her all the way from Philadelphia. And when the conductor shook her awake, announcing her stop, she had stumbled onto the platform with her 2 worn carpetbags without questioning whether this was truly the right place. Now the train was gone, vanishing around a bend in the tracks, and the small wooden sign nailed to the station wall read Pioche, Nevada, in fading letters that made her heart sink into her stomach. Catherine turned in a slow circle, taking in the desolate scene before her. The station was little more than a covered platform with a small office that appeared abandoned, its door hanging open on rusty hinges. Beyond the tracks stretched a landscape of white-covered sagebrush and rocky hills, with mountains rising in the distance beneath threatening clouds. The wind howled across the open terrain, cutting through her coat despite its thick wool, and she pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she tried to decide what to do. No town was visible from where she stood, though a rough road led away from the station toward what she hoped was civilization. The temperature was dropping as afternoon faded toward evening, and she knew with certainty that she could not stay here on this exposed platform overnight. She picked up her bags, their weight familiar after so many days of carrying them, and started walking along the road. Her boots, suitable for Philadelphia's cobblestone streets, slipped on the packed snow and ice, forcing her to move carefully. The carpetbags grew heavier with each step, and the wind seemed to intensify, driving snow into her face until she had to squint to see ahead. After what felt like an hour but was probably only 20 minutes, she caught sight of buildings in the distance, their shapes dark against the white landscape. Relief flooded through her, giving her strength to continue despite her aching arms and frozen feet. Pioche, when she finally reached it, was larger than she had expected, with a main street lined with wooden buildings that housed saloons, general stores, a hotel, and various businesses she could not identify in the fading light. The boardwalks were covered in snow, and few people moved about in the bitter cold. Catherine headed directly for the hotel, a 2-story structure with a sign proclaiming it the Mountain View Hotel, and pushed through the door into blessed warmth. The lobby was small but clean, with a pot-bellied stove radiating heat and a clerk behind a wooden desk who looked up as she entered. He was an older man with gray whiskers and skeptical eyes that took in her travel-worn appearance and Eastern clothing with one sweeping glance. "Need a room," Catherine said, setting down her bags and trying to stop her teeth from chattering. "Just for tonight, until I can arrange transportation to Silver Springs." The clerk shook his head slowly. "Silver Springs is 40 miles south, miss, and we will not have another stage heading that direction for 3 days, maybe 4 if this weather keeps up. Winter storms in these parts can close the roads for a week or more." Catherine felt her carefully maintained composure begin to crack. 3 or 4 days meant she would arrive nearly a week late to meet Samuel Garrett, who might very well assume she had changed her mind and was not coming at all. She had spent every cent she could spare on the train ticket west, and her funds were dangerously low. Is there no other way? A private wagon, perhaps, or someone traveling in that direction. In this weather? Not likely. Most folks with any sense are staying indoors. The clerk named a price for the room that made Catherine's stomach clench, knowing it would consume most of her remaining money, but she had no choice. She counted out the coins and accepted the key he offered, then climbed the narrow stairs to a small room with a single window overlooking the street. She sat on the edge of the thin mattress and let herself cry for the first time since leaving Philadelphia. Everything had gone wrong from the moment she made the decision to answer that advertisement seeking a wife for a Nevada rancher. Her father had died 6 months earlier, leaving debts that consumed everything, and her position as a seamstress barely paid enough to rent a corner of a room in a boarding house where the landlady watched her with predatory eyes, waiting for her to miss a payment. Samuel Garrett's letters had offered escape, a new life in the West where she could have a home and security, and she had convinced herself that affection might grow between them even if passion never did. But now she was stranded in the wrong town with almost no money, and the man waiting for her in Silver Springs had no way of knowing what had happened. She forced herself to stop crying and washed her face in the basin of cold water on the washstand. Self-pity would accomplish nothing. Tomorrow she would inquire more thoroughly about transportation, and if necessary, she would send a telegram to Samuel explaining the situation. She changed out of her damp traveling dress into her one other dress, a simple brown wool that was slightly less wrinkled, and went downstairs to ask the clerk about supper. He directed her to a restaurant 2 buildings down, and she ventured out into the cold again, hurrying along the boardwalk with her shawl pulled over her head. The restaurant was warm and crowded, full of miners and workers who stopped their conversations to stare as she entered. Catherine kept her eyes down and took a seat at a small table near the back, ordering the cheapest item on the menu, a bowl of stew with bread. She was halfway through her meal when the door opened again, letting in a blast of cold air and a man who carried the outdoors with him like a second skin. He was tall, with broad shoulders beneath a heavy coat, and he moved with the easy confidence of someone completely at home in his environment. His hat was dusted with snow, and when he removed it, she saw dark hair and a face that was younger than she expected, perhaps in his mid-20s, with strong features and eyes that swept the room before settling on her with brief curiosity. He took a seat at the counter, and Catherine returned her attention to her stew, but she found herself aware of his presence, of the way other men greeted him with respect, and the way he spoke to the proprietor with familiar ease. When she finished eating and counted out coins to pay, she was painfully conscious of how few remained in her small purse. Back at the hotel, she lay in bed listening to the wind howl around the building and tried not to think about all the ways her situation could get worse. Sleep came eventually, troubled by dreams of missing trains and endless snow. Morning brought no improvement in the weather. Catherine woke to find fresh snow piling against her window and the wind still raging. She dressed in her traveling dress, now mostly dry, and went downstairs to ask the clerk about the telegraph office. 3 buildings east, he told her. But I heard the lines are down from the storm. Might be days before they are fixed. Of course they were. Catherine thanked him and stepped outside, shocked by the ferocity of the wind that nearly knocked her off her feet. She struggled along the boardwalk, keeping one hand on the building walls for support, until she reached the telegraph office. A sign on the door confirmed what the clerk had said. Lines down, no service until further notice. She stood in the shelter of the doorway, trying to decide what to do next, when a voice behind her said, "You look lost." Catherine turned to find the man from the restaurant standing there, studying her with those observant eyes. Up close, she could see they were gray, like the winter sky, and his face had a weathered quality despite his youth that spoke of a life spent outdoors. "I am stranded," she said, deciding honesty was her only option. "I was supposed to arrive in Silver Springs, but I got off at the wrong station, and now I cannot get there or even send word that I have been delayed." He nodded slowly, as if this made perfect sense. "Silver Springs is rough country to reach in winter. Who are you meeting there?" "Samuel Garrett. He is expecting me." She did not add that Samuel was expecting his mail-order bride, not wanting to see judgment in this stranger's eyes. Something shifted in his expression, too quick to read. "I know Sam Garrett. He has a ranch south of Silver Springs, raises cattle and horses." He paused, seeming to consider something. "I am headed back to my place this afternoon, weather permitting. My ranch is about halfway between here and Silver Springs. You could come with me, stay at my place until the road's clear enough to get you the rest of the way to Garrett's ranch. Safer than staying in town with no money and no way to contact anyone." Catherine stared at him, uncertain whether to be grateful or suspicious. Young women did not travel alone with strange men, not if they valued their reputations. But her reputation would matter little if she froze to death or starved because she could not afford to stay in Pioche until the roads opened. "I do not even know your name." "Samuel Kinsey," he said, and there was something almost ironic in the way he said it. "Most people call me Sam, which will make things confusing since that is Garrett's name too. My ranch is called the Double K, been in my family since before I was born. I am not asking you to trust me blind. We can stop by the sheriff's office right now, and he will tell you I am who I say I am, and that I am reasonably trustworthy." The fact that he suggested involving the sheriff made Catherine feel marginally better about the proposal. Why would you do this for a stranger? Sam Kinsey shrugged, a simple lift of his broad shoulders. "Because you need help, and I have a mother and a sister, and I would hope someone would help them if they were stranded in a strange town in the middle of winter. Also, like I said, I know Sam Garrett and he is a decent man. He will be worried if his bride does not arrive." So he had guessed the nature of her relationship with Samuel Garrett. Catherine felt her cheeks warm despite the cold, but there was no mockery in Sam Kinsey's expression, only a straightforward honesty that made her want to trust him. "Very well. Let us speak to the sheriff." The sheriff's office was a sturdy building near the center of town, and the sheriff himself was a grizzled man in his 50s, who confirmed that Sam Kinsey was indeed the owner of the Double K Ranch and was as trustworthy as any man in the territory. He looked at Catherine with something like pity when Sam explained the situation. "You will be safer at the Double K than here in town," the sheriff said. "Sam's mother, Eliza, is a formidable woman, and she will see to it that you are properly looked after. When the weather clears, Sam can take you on to Garrett's place." Catherine made her decision. "Thank you. I accept your offer, Mr. Kinsey." "Just Sam," he said. "We do not stand much on formality out here." They collected her bags from the hotel, where the clerk refunded half her payment when she explained she would not need the room after all. And then Sam led her to the stable where he had left his wagon and team. The wagon was a sturdy affair with high sides and a canvas cover that could be pulled over the top for protection from the elements. Sam helped her up onto the seat, then loaded her bags in the back before climbing up beside her. "It is about a 4-hour drive in good weather," he said, gathering the reins. "Might take longer today depending on how bad the roads are. I have blankets behind the seat if you get too cold." The wind was brutal as they left Pioche, and Catherine soon pulled one of the rough wool blankets around herself, grateful for its warmth even though it smelled of horse and hay. Sam drove with easy competence, guiding the team along a road that was barely visible beneath the snow. He did not try to make conversation over the howl of the wind, for which Catherine was grateful. She was too tired and too overwhelmed to manage small talk with a stranger. As they traveled, she studied him from the corner of her eye, trying to understand the man who had so casually offered help to someone he did not know. He was handsome in a rugged way that was very different from the men she had known in Philadelphia, with their soft hands and indoor complexions. Sam's hands on the reins were strong and capable, scarred from work, and his profile against the white landscape had a stark quality that was almost artistic. He wore his authority lightly, but she sensed it was there nonetheless, in the way he handled the horses and read the landscape around them. After about 2 hours, the wind began to die down, and the snow thinned to occasional flurries. Sam glanced at her and said, "We will stop soon to rest the horses and eat something. There is a line shack about a mile ahead where we can get out of the weather for a bit." The line shack turned out to be a small cabin, barely more than 1 room, but it was solid and had a stove. Sam got a fire going while Catherine stood near the door, unsure of the etiquette of being alone with a man in such an isolated place. He seemed to sense her discomfort and busied himself with practical matters, heating coffee and pulling out some bread and dried meat from a saddlebag. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to one of the 2 chairs near the stove. "You look ready to drop." Catherine sat, accepting the coffee he handed her with gratitude. The warmth seeped into her frozen hands and she sipped the strong, bitter liquid without complaint. Sam took the other chair and ate his bread and meat in silence, staring into the fire. "Can I ask you something?" Catherine said after a while, "Go ahead." "Why are you not married? You have a ranch, a family. Most men in your position would have a wife by now." Sam was quiet for a long moment. "I was engaged once," he said finally. 3 years ago. Her name was Margaret and she was from Sacramento. She came out here to visit her aunt and uncle, and we met at a dance. I thought she understood what life on a ranch would be like, but when it came time for the wedding, she took one look at the isolation and the hard work and the long winters and got back on the stage to California. Last I heard, she married a banker. There was no bitterness in his voice, just a quiet acceptance that made Catherine's chest tighten. "I am sorry. Do not be. She made the right choice for herself. Ranch life is not for everyone, especially not for women raised in cities. It is lonely, and the work never ends, and there are no fancy parties or theaters or anything like that. You have to really love the land and the life to make it work." He looked at her directly. "I hope you know what you are getting into with Sam Garrett." "I hope so too," Catherine said honestly. "But I did not have many other options. My father died and left debts, and I could barely afford to eat in Philadelphia. At least out here, I will have a home and a purpose." "A marriage should be more than just survival," Sam said quietly. "Perhaps, but sometimes survival is enough to start with." Catherine set down her empty cup. "Thank you for the coffee, and for helping me. I know you did not have to." "My mother would have skinned me alive if she found out I left a stranded woman in Pioche," Sam said with a slight smile that transformed his serious face. "Come on. We should get moving before the weather turns again." They reached the Double K Ranch as the winter sun was setting, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. The ranch was larger than Catherine had expected, with a main house, a barn, and several outbuildings arranged around a central yard. Smoke rose from the chimney of the main house, promising warmth and food, and as Sam brought the wagon to a stop, the front door opened and a woman emerged. She was in her 50s, Catherine guessed, with dark hair streaked with gray and a face that had once been beautiful, and was now handsome in the way of women who had lived full lives. She wore a practical wool dress and an apron, and her eyes went immediately to Catherine with sharp curiosity. "Sam, "Who is this?" she called. "This is Catherine Riley," Sam said, jumping down from the wagon and coming around to help Catherine down. "She got stranded in Pioche on her way to meet Sam Garrett in Silver Springs. I told her she could stay here until the road's clear." The woman, who had to be Sam's mother, Eliza, studied Catherine for a moment, and then her expression softened. "You poor dear, you look half frozen. Come inside immediately. Sam, bring her bags." Catherine found herself swept into the warm house, into a kitchen that smelled of baking bread and stew, where a young woman of about 20 was setting the table for supper. She had Sam's dark hair and gray eyes, and she looked up with bright interest as they entered. "This is my sister Margaret," Eliza said. "Margaret, this is Catherine Riley. She will be staying with us for a few days." Margaret smiled warmly. "Welcome to the Double K. Let me take your coat. You must be exhausted." Within minutes, Catherine found herself seated at the large kitchen table with a bowl of hot stew and fresh bread in front of her, while Eliza and Margaret bustled about asking questions and making her feel more welcome than she had felt in months. Sam came in with her bags and disappeared down a hallway, and when he returned, he had removed his coat and hat and washed up. "I put your things in the spare room," he told Catherine. "It is not fancy, but the bed is comfortable, and there are extra quilts if you get cold." The spare room turned out to be small but spotlessly clean, with a narrow bed covered in colorful quilts, a washstand, and a chest of drawers. A window looked out over the snowy landscape, and Catherine stood for a moment gazing at the vast emptiness, trying to imagine what her life would be like in a place like this. That night, lying in the comfortable bed beneath the warm quilts, listening to the wind whisper around the house, Catherine felt a strange sense of peace. She was still stranded, still uncertain of her future, but for this moment she was safe and warm and surrounded by people who had shown her kindness without asking for anything in return. She woke the next morning to the sound of roosters crowing and the smell of coffee and bacon. When she emerged from her room, she found Margaret in the kitchen, already dressed and cooking breakfast. "Sam and Mother are out doing the morning chores," Margaret said cheerfully. "They will be back soon. Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in weeks," Catherine admitted. "Can I help with anything? Can you make biscuits?" "My biscuits never turn out as well as Mother's." Catherine rolled up her sleeves and got to work, falling easily into the rhythm of kitchen tasks that were familiar from her childhood before her father's business had failed. By the time Sam and Eliza returned, stamping snow from their boots, the kitchen table was laden with food over breakfast. Eliza asked careful questions about Catherine's journey and her background, and Catherine found herself telling the story of her father's death and her decision to come west. She left out some of the more difficult details, but she was honest about her circumstances, and both women listened with sympathy. "It takes courage to start over in a new place," Eliza said. "I came west with my husband 30 years ago when this was even rougher country than it is now. I was terrified for the first year, but I grew to love it. The land gets into your blood if you let it." "Sam said the same thing, more or less," Catherine said, glancing at him where he sat at the head of the table, eating steadily. "Did he?" Eliza looked at her son with interest. "Sam does not usually talk much about such things." Sam shrugged, seemingly uncomfortable with the attention. "I am going to ride out and check the north fence line," he said, finishing his coffee. "Some of the posts were loose last time I was up there, and I want to make sure they are holding with all this snow." "Take your heavy coat," Eliza said automatically, "and be back before dark." After Sam left, Catherine helped Margaret and Eliza clean up the breakfast dishes, and then Eliza suggested she might want to rest, but Catherine shook her head. "I have been resting for 3 weeks on trains. I would rather do something useful if you will let me." The three women spent the day on various household tasks, and Catherine found herself enjoying the companionship in a way she had not expected. Margaret was bright and talkative, full of stories about life on the ranch and questions about Philadelphia and Eastern fashions. Eliza was quieter but warm, and she had a dry sense of humor that made Catherine laugh. Sam returned in the late afternoon, cold and covered in snow, and disappeared to the barn to tend to his horse. When he came in for supper, he was quieter than usual, and Catherine noticed Eliza watching him with concern. After supper, while Margaret and Catherine were washing dishes, Eliza drew Sam aside in the front room, and Catherine could not help but overhear their low-voiced conversation. "She seems like a lovely girl," Eliza said. "She is," Sam replied shortly. "It is a shame she is promised to Sam Garrett. I always thought he was a bit too old for a young bride." "Mother, do not start. I am just saying if circumstances were different, but they are not different. She is Garrett's intended, and as soon as the road's clear, I will take her to Silver Springs as promised. That is the end of it." There was a long silence, and then Eliza said softly, "Is it?" Sam did not answer, and Catherine heard his footsteps heading toward the back of the house. She bent over the dishes, her cheeks warm, and tried not to think about the implications of what she had just heard. The storm continued for 3 more days, keeping them all housebound except for essential trips to the barn and outbuildings. Catherine fell into the rhythm of ranch life, helping with cooking and mending and the endless small tasks that kept a household running. She found herself watching Sam when she thought he was not looking, noticing the gentle way he handled his mother and sister, the patience he showed when teaching Margaret how to repair a bridle, the strength in his hands as he chopped wood for the stove. He was different from Samuel Garrett, the man whose letters she had carefully read and reread. Garrett's letters had been proper and restrained, outlining his circumstances and requirements for a wife with businesslike precision. Sam Kinsey was all quiet competence and unexpected kindness, with an understated sense of humor that emerged at odd moments and made her smile. She told herself firmly that it did not matter. She had made a commitment to Samuel Garrett, and she would honor it. But she could not help the small flicker of regret that grew stronger each day she spent at the Double K. On the 4th morning, Catherine woke to silence. The wind had stopped, and when she looked out the window, she saw clear blue sky and sunshine glittering on the snow. Her heart sank even as she recognized the absurdity of the reaction. At breakfast, Sam confirmed what she already knew. "The weather has cleared. I will take you to Silver Springs tomorrow. I need today to make sure everything here is secure, but we can leave at first light." "Of course," Catherine said, keeping her voice steady. "Thank you for everything you have done." That day had a strange, suspended quality. Catherine helped Margaret with the washing, the two of them hauling water and heating it on the stove, scrubbing clothes against washboards until Catherine's hands were red and sore. As they worked, Margaret talked about a young man who had been courting her, a rancher's son from a spread 10 miles south. "His name is David, and he is very handsome," Margaret said, her eyes bright. "But I am not sure I am ready to marry yet. Once I marry, I will leave here and I will miss Mother and Sam terribly." "Your mother seems like a strong woman," Catherine said. "I am sure she will be fine." "She will, but Sam will be lonely. He pretends he is content on his own, but I see the way he looks sometimes, like he is missing something he cannot name." Margaret glanced at Catherine. "He likes you, you know." Catherine felt her cheeks warm. "He has been very kind. It is more than kindness. I have seen the way he watches you when he thinks no one is looking. It is the same way David looks at me." Margaret wrung out a shirt with more force than necessary. "I wish you were not already promised to someone else." "So do I," Catherine whispered. the admission escaping before she could stop it. Margaret reached over and squeezed her hand, leaving it damp. Life is strange sometimes, but you have to follow your heart, Catherine. Otherwise, you will spend your whole life wondering what might have been. That afternoon, while Eliza was resting and Margaret was in the barn, Catherine found herself alone in the kitchen with Sam. He was repairing a harness at the kitchen table, his strong hands working the leather with practiced ease. Catherine was mending one of Eliza's dresses, and the silence between them was comfortable until Sam suddenly said, "You do not have to go through with it, you know." Catherine looked up, her needle poised in mid-stitch. "What do you mean, marrying Sam Garrett?" "If you have doubts, if you think you are making a mistake, you can change your mind. I will still take you to Silver Springs if that is what you want, but I could also take you back to Pioche, put you on a train east. Or you could stay here." Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Stay here." Sam set down the harness and looked at her directly. "I know this is sudden, and I know you barely know me, but I have to say this because I will regret it for the rest of my life if I do not. I have feelings for you, Catherine. Real feelings. I think about you all the time, and the idea of taking you to another man tomorrow makes me feel like something is being torn out of my chest." Catherine could not breathe. "Sam, let me finish. I am not asking you to marry me right now. I know that would be crazy. But I am asking you to consider staying here, getting to know me and my family, giving us a chance to see if what I feel might grow into something mutual. If it does not, if you decide after a few weeks or months that you would rather go back east or that you want to meet Sam Garrett after all, I will respect that. But please, at least think about it." The dress had fallen from Catherine's lap, and she did not bother to pick it up. "I have feelings for you too," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I have been trying not to, trying to convince myself that I am just grateful for your help, but it is more than that. When I think about leaving tomorrow, about never seeing you again, I feel like I am making a terrible mistake." Sam was around the table in 2 strides, pulling her up from her chair and into his arms. He held her carefully as if she might break, and Catherine pressed her face against his chest and felt his heart beating as fast as her own. "Stay," he said into her hair. "Please stay." "I do not want to dishonor my commitment to Mr. Garrett," Catherine said, her voice muffled against his shirt. "I wrote to him. I accepted his proposal. You write to him and explain the situation. Tell him the truth, that you met someone else and that you are sorry but you cannot marry him. He will be disappointed, but he will understand. Sam Garrett is a reasonable man." Sam pulled back enough to look down at her, and there was such intensity in his gray eyes that Catherine felt her breath catch. "I know this is fast. I know it seems reckless, but when you have been alone as long as I have, you recognize something real when it comes along." "How can you be sure?" Catherine whispered. "I cannot be sure of anything except how I feel right now, but I want the chance to find out." His hands came up to cup her face, his calloused thumbs gentle against her cheeks. "Stay, Catherine. Give us a chance." She thought about Samuel Garrett, the man waiting in Silver Springs for a bride who would never arrive. She thought about the practical reasons she had come west, about security and survival and having a home. And then she looked into Sam Kinsey's eyes and saw something she had never expected to find. The possibility of love, real love, the kind that was based on more than just necessity. "I will stay," she said. Sam's smile was like sunrise, transforming his face, and then he was kissing her, and Catherine forgot about everything else except the warmth of his mouth and the strength of his arms and the feeling that she had finally come home. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Sam rested his forehead against hers. "I will ride to Silver Springs tomorrow and explain everything to Sam Garrett in person. It is the least I can do. and I will help you write a letter explaining your decision. He deserves honesty." "Thank you," Catherine said, "for everything. For finding me, for bringing me here, for giving me a choice." "Come home," Sam said softly, echoing the words he had said to her in Pioche. And this time Catherine understood that he was not just talking about his ranch, but about something deeper. Something that had to do with belonging and being seen and choosing each other, despite all the reasons they should not. They were married 6 weeks later, on a bright February morning when the snow was beginning to melt, and the first hints of spring were touching the landscape. The ceremony took place in the small church in Pioche, with Eliza and Margaret standing as witnesses and half the town in attendance, curious about the mail-order bride who had ended up with the wrong Sam. Samuel Garrett had been surprisingly gracious when Sam rode to Silver Springs to explain the situation. He had accepted Sam's explanation with a rueful nod and admitted that he had suspected something might be amiss when his expected bride did not arrive. He had been disappointed but not heartbroken, and 6 months later Catherine heard that he had married a widow from Carson City and seemed quite content. Catherine's first year on the Double K was harder than she had anticipated. The work was endless and exhausting, and the isolation sometimes pressed on her like a physical weight. There were days when she missed Philadelphia with an ache that surprised her, missed the noise and bustle and the ability to walk down a street and see other people. But there were also moments of profound joy. Watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold and pink, riding out with Sam to check on the cattle and feeling the vast freedom of the open range, lying in his arms at night and listening to him talk about his dreams for the ranch. Eliza was a patient teacher, showing Catherine how to make butter and cheese, how to preserve food for the winter, how to treat common injuries and illnesses with the limited supplies available. Margaret became the sister Catherine had never had, and the two women spent long afternoons together, sewing and talking and laughing. Sam was a revelation. He was patient with Catherine's mistakes, generous with his praise, and passionate in his affections. He worked from dawn until well past dark most days, but he always made time for her, whether it was a few stolen minutes in the barn or a longer evening sitting together on the porch watching the stars. He told her about his father, who had died when Sam was 18, leaving him to run the ranch alone for 7 years, until he felt competent enough to truly call himself a rancher. He told her about his hopes of expanding their herd, of building a new barn, of maybe one day having children who would grow up loving this land as much as he did. By the time summer arrived, Catherine could not imagine living anywhere else. The work was still hard, and she still had moments of doubt, but they were growing fewer and farther between. She had learned to ride well enough to accompany Sam on some of his rounds, and she took fierce pride in her growing competence at the 1,000 tasks that made up ranch life. In August, she realized she was pregnant. She told Sam one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, and his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He pulled her into his lap and held her carefully, as if she had suddenly become fragile, and when he finally spoke his voice was rough with emotion. "Are you happy?" he asked. "So happy," Catherine assured him. "A little scared, but mostly happy." "I will take care of you," Sam promised. "Both of you. Always." Margaret was thrilled at the prospect of becoming an aunt, and Eliza immediately began organizing, making lists of things that would need to be done before the baby arrived in the spring. Catherine found herself surrounded by love and support, and she thought often about how different her life would be if that train conductor had woken her at the right station. The winter was long and cold, and by February, Catherine was tired of being pregnant, tired of being too large to move comfortably, tired of the constant backache and swollen ankles. But Sam was endlessly patient, bringing her tea and rubbing her feet and telling her she was beautiful even when she felt like an enormous whale. Their son was born on a cold March morning, with Eliza serving as midwife and Sam pacing anxiously in the kitchen until his mother finally called him in to meet his child. Catherine was exhausted and sore, but when Sam placed the tiny, red-faced baby in her arms, she felt a surge of love so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. They named him Daniel after Sam's father, and he was a good baby, healthy and strong-lunged. Sam was besotted from the first moment, and Catherine often found him holding his son in the early morning hours, talking to him in a low voice about the ranch and the horses, and all the things they would do together when Daniel was older. Margaret married her David that summer, in a ceremony much larger than Catherine and Sam's had been, with guests from all over the territory. Catherine stood as Margaret's bridesmaid, with baby Daniel in her arms, and watched as her sister-in-law promised to love and honor her chosen man. The young couple moved to David's family ranch, and though they were only 10 miles away, Catherine missed Margaret's daily presence. But Eliza was still there, a constant source of wisdom and support, and Catherine found herself growing closer to her mother-in-law with each passing month. They worked together in the garden, putting up vegetables for the winter, and Eliza told stories about the early days of the ranch, about the struggles and triumphs and the slow building of something lasting. When Daniel was a year old, Sam began talking about adding on to the house, building more rooms for the children he hoped they would have. Catherine was pregnant again by then, though she had not yet told him, and she smiled at his plans and suggestions. Their second child, a daughter they named Emma, was born the following spring. She had Catherine's dark hair and Sam's gray eyes, and she was louder and more demanding than Daniel had been, keeping them all awake with her lusty cries. But she was also affectionate and quick to smile, and Sam doted on her shamelessly. The years flowed past with surprising speed. Daniel grew into a serious boy who followed his father everywhere, learning to ride almost before he could walk, fascinated by every aspect of ranch life. Emma was her grandmother's shadow, learning to cook and sew and manage a household with the same fierce competence Eliza displayed. They had 2 more children, another son named Thomas and a daughter named Sarah, and the house rang with noise and laughter and the organized chaos of a large family. Sam expanded the ranch gradually, buying adjoining land when it became available, increasing their herd, building the new barn he had dreamed about. Catherine never forgot that moment on the train platform in Pioche, standing alone in the snow with no idea what would happen next. Sometimes, usually late at night when everyone else was asleep, she thought about the life she might have had if she had gotten off at the right station, if she had married Samuel Garrett and made a life in Silver Springs. She thought she would have been content, probably, in a practical sort of way. But she would never have known this kind of happiness, this bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Sam gave her a necklace he had commissioned from a jeweler in Carson City, a simple gold chain with a pendant shaped like a train. Catherine laughed when she saw it, and Sam grinned. "So you never forget how we met," he said. "As if I could," Catherine replied, fastening it around her neck. "Getting on the wrong train was the best mistake I ever made." They were standing on the porch, watching their children play in the yard while the sun set behind the mountains. Sam put his arm around her waist and pulled her close, and Catherine leaned into his warmth, thinking about everything that had changed in 10 years, about how a life could turn on the smallest of chances. "No regrets?" Sam asked, as if reading her mind. "Not a single one," Catherine said honestly. "This is home. You are home," You always will be." The ranch continued to prosper over the years. Daniel, serious and hardworking, took over more and more of the daily operations as he grew into a young man, giving Sam more time to spend with their younger children. Emma proved to have a gift for numbers and began keeping the ranch accounts when she was only 16, catching errors that had been costing them money for years. Thomas was the adventurous one, always climbing higher, riding faster, pushing boundaries, giving Catherine gray hairs. And Sarah, their youngest, had inherited both her father's quiet competence and her mother's determination, along with a gift for gentling horses that made even the most fractious animals calm under her hands. Eliza lived to see all her grandchildren grown, passing away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78. Her loss left a hole in all their lives, but especially in Catherine's, who had come to love her mother-in-law as deeply as if they had been blood relations. They buried her on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a simple headstone that read, "Eliza Kinsey, beloved mother and grandmother," and Catherine planted wildflowers on the grave every spring. Margaret and David had children of their own, 3 daughters who were frequent visitors to the Double K, and the two families remained close despite the distance. Margaret often remarked on how lucky they all were, how easily things could have gone differently, and Catherine always agreed. When Daniel was 22, he married a girl from Pioche named Alice, the daughter of the hotel keeper, who had refunded Catherine's money that long-ago winter day. Alice was practical and kind, with a sense of humor that balanced Daniel's seriousness, and she fit into the family as if she had always been there. They built a house on the north section of the ranch, and within a year, Alice was pregnant with the first of what would eventually be 5 children. Emma surprised everyone by announcing she had no intention of marrying, at least not yet. She wanted to go to San Francisco and study business, to see something of the world beyond Nevada's borders before settling down. Sam was hesitant, worried about his daughter in the big city, but Catherine supported Emma's decision. "Let her go," Catherine told her husband. "She needs to know what else is out there before she can truly choose this life." So Emma went to San Francisco, and she wrote long letters home describing the city and her studies and the strange new world of urban life. She came home for visits twice a year, always bearing gifts and stories, and after 3 years she announced she was returning for good. "I needed to see it," she told Catherine. "I needed to know what I would be choosing if I stayed here, and now I know. This is where I belong." 6 months later, Emma married a young rancher she had known since childhood, a quiet man named Robert who understood her need for independence and her sharp mind. They took over the southern section of the Double K, and Emma continued to manage the accounts for the entire ranch while also running her own household. Thomas was the one who eventually left for good. At 19, he announced his intention to join the army, to see more of the country and have adventures beyond the ranch. Catherine's heart broke a little, but she understood. Not everyone was meant for ranch life, no matter how much they loved their family. They held a big dinner before he left, with all the family present, and Sam gave his second son his blessing along with a substantial sum of money and instructions to write often. Thomas kept his promise, sending letters from various army posts throughout the West, and he came home on leave whenever he could. He never married, though he had a series of what he described as near misses, and he seemed content with his chosen life. Sarah, their youngest, was the one who surprised them most. At 20, she fell in love with a Paiute man named Running Wolf who worked on a neighboring ranch. The relationship caused talk in town, and there were some who looked at Sarah and her chosen man with disapproval and worse, but Catherine and Sam stood firmly behind their daughter. "Love is love," Catherine told anyone who would listen. "My daughter has chosen a good man, and that is all that matters." The wedding was a blend of traditions, with a church ceremony followed by a celebration that incorporated Running Wolf's tribal customs. It was beautiful and moving, and Catherine cried throughout, thinking about how far they had all come, how much the world had changed since that winter day in 1882, when she had stepped off a train in the wrong town. Running Wolf and Sarah built a house on the western edge of the ranch, and Running Wolf proved to be as gifted with horses as Sarah was. Together, they began breeding and training horses that became sought after throughout the territory, and their section of the ranch became known for producing the finest mounts in Nevada. As Sam and Catherine grew older, they gradually handed over more responsibility to their children, content to step back and watch the next generation take over. They spent their days working in the garden, riding out occasionally to check on various sections of the ranch, and enjoying their growing collection of grandchildren. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered at the main house for a celebration. All 4 of their children were there with their families, along with Margaret and David and their daughters and grandchildren. The house was bursting at the seams with noise and laughter, and Catherine stood in the kitchen, surveying the chaos with deep contentment. Sam came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Happy?" he asked. "Ridiculously happy," Catherine confirmed. "Though I cannot believe it has been 30 years. It seems like just yesterday you were telling me to come home." "Best decision I ever made," Sam said. "Well, that and actually bringing you home instead of taking you to Silver Springs like I promised." "You did take me to Silver Springs," Catherine reminded him. "You rode down there and explained everything to Mr. Garrett in person, like the honorable man you are." "True. Though I will admit, I was terrified the whole ride that you would change your mind before I got back." Catherine turned in his arms to face him. His hair was mostly gray now, and there were deep lines around his eyes and mouth, but to her he was still the man who had found her shivering on that platform and offered her a choice. "I never even considered changing my mind. From the moment I said I would stay, I was sure." "I love you," Sam said, and after 30 years the words still had the power to make her heart skip. "I love you too," Catherine replied. "Always and forever." They were interrupted by a horde of grandchildren demanding that grandmother come tell them a story, and Catherine allowed herself to be pulled away to the front room, where she settled into her favorite chair with 3 grandchildren on her lap and several more clustered around her feet. "Tell us about how you met grandfather," demanded Daniel's oldest daughter, a bright-eyed 8-year-old named Lily. Catherine glanced across the room to where Sam was talking with Daniel and Robert, and he met her eyes and smiled, clearly knowing what story she was about to tell. She had told it dozens of times over the years, and it never got old. "Well," Catherine began, "it was the winter of 1882, and I was on a train heading west to meet a man I had never seen before." The children listened raptly as she told the familiar story about the wrong station and the snowstorm and the kind cowboy who had found her and said, "Come home." She left out some of the more complicated parts, simplifying the tale for young ears, but the essential truth remained the same. Sometimes getting lost was the only way to find where you truly belonged. When the story was finished, Lily sighed dramatically. "That is so romantic, grandmother." "It is," Catherine agreed, though it was also terrifying at the time, but life is like that sometimes. The best things often come from the scariest moments if you are brave enough to take the risk. Later, after the children had been put to bed in various rooms throughout the house, and the adults were enjoying coffee and conversation in the front room, Margaret raised her glass in a toast. "To Catherine and Sam," she said, "who proved that sometimes the best plans are the ones that get derailed. May they have many more years together." Everyone raised their glasses and drank, and Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. She had been blessed beyond measure, given a life she could never have imagined when she left Philadelphia all those years ago. She had found love and purpose, and a family that stretched across the ranch and beyond, and all because she had been tired and distracted and gotten off at the wrong station. As the evening wore on and guests began to drift off to their various sleeping arrangements, Catherine and Sam found themselves alone on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the cool evening air. The sky was brilliant with stars, as it always was in Nevada, and the silence was broken only by the occasional sound of a horse moving in the barn or an owl calling from the trees. "You ever wonder what your life would have been like if you had made it to Silver Springs?" Sam asked quietly. Catherine considered the question seriously. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I think I would have been all right. Mr. Garrett seemed like a decent man and I would have made the best of it, but I would never have known what I was missing. I would never have known that love could feel like this, like coming home to myself. I would never have had you or our children or this life we have built together." "I am glad you got on the wrong train," Sam said. "So am I. Though I still maintain that it was the conductor's fault for not announcing the stops clearly." Catherine smiled. "Everything happens for a reason, I suppose, or maybe it is all just random chance, and we make our own reasons by the choices we make afterward." "Either way, I am grateful," Sam said. "For every moment, even the hard ones, especially the hard ones because they made us stronger." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars and listening to the night sounds. Catherine thought about all the years stretching behind them, full of joy and sorrow, triumph and struggle, the everyday moments that had woven together into a life. She thought about the years still ahead, fewer now than those behind, and she felt no fear. Whatever time they had left, they would face it together, just as they had faced everything else. "Ready for bed?" Sam asked eventually. "In a minute," Catherine said. "I just want to sit here a little longer and count my blessings." Sam tightened his arm around her shoulders. "Count me among them, always," Catherine assured him. "You are the first and greatest of all my blessings." They sat together under the stars, two people who had found each other in the most unexpected way, who had built a life and a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. And Catherine thought, not for the first time, that getting lost was sometimes the best thing that could happen, because it meant you could be found by exactly the right person. The ranch continued to thrive as the new century approached. The children and grandchildren grew and had children of their own, and the Double K expanded until it was one of the most successful operations in the territory. Catherine and Sam watched it all with pride and satisfaction, knowing that what they had started would endure. When Sam was 68, he had a heart attack while working in the barn. It was not fatal, but it slowed him down considerably, and Catherine nursed him through his recovery with fierce determination. The doctor told them Sam needed to take things easier, to let the next generation handle more of the physical work, and reluctantly, Sam agreed. It was harder for him than Catherine had anticipated, this stepping back from the active management of the ranch. Sam had defined himself by his work for so long that retirement felt like losing part of his identity. But gradually, he found new rhythms, spending more time with his grandchildren, taking up whittling, and working on a written history of the ranch that he hoped would be passed down through the generations. Catherine's health remained good well into her 70s, and she continued to work in her garden and help with the cooking and cleaning, though she too had slowed down. Her hair had gone completely white, and her hands were twisted with arthritis, but her mind was as sharp as ever, and she still managed the household with quiet efficiency. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, and the party lasted 3 days. Catherine looked around at the sea of faces, all of them connected to her and Sam by blood or marriage, and felt overwhelmed by love and gratitude. "We did good," Sam whispered to her during a quiet moment. "Look at all of this. Look at what we made." "We did very good," Catherine agreed. Sam lived to be 72, passing away peacefully in his sleep on a warm September night. Catherine woke to find him gone, and though she had known this day would come eventually, the reality of it was devastating. He had been her partner, her lover, her best friend for 42 years, and the world without him felt hollow and strange. The funeral was the largest Pioche had ever seen, with people coming from all over the territory to pay their respects to a man who had been respected and loved by everyone who knew him. They buried him next to his mother on the hill overlooking the ranch, and Catherine stood dry-eyed through the service, too numb with grief to cry. In the weeks that followed, she moved through her days in a fog, performing familiar tasks by rote while her mind struggled to adjust to Sam's absence. Daniel and Alice moved into the main house to keep her company, and her children and grandchildren visited frequently, but nothing could fill the Sam-shaped hole in her heart. One morning, about 2 months after Sam's death, Catherine woke before dawn and walked out to the porch where she and Sam had spent so many evenings together. She sat in her usual chair and watched the sun rise over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and she felt Sam's presence so strongly it was as if he were sitting beside her. "I miss you," she said aloud to the empty air. "Every single day I miss you." The wind whispered through the trees, and Catherine chose to believe it was Sam's answer. She sat there until the sun was fully up, and then she went inside and made breakfast for Daniel and Alice and their youngest daughter who was still living at home. Life would go on because it had to, and she would go on with it, carrying Sam in her heart until the day they were reunited. Catherine lived another 8 years, dying peacefully in her sleep at the age of 83. Her children found her in her bed, a slight smile on her face, and they liked to think she had gone to join Sam at last. They buried her next to him on the hill, with a headstone that read Catherine Kinsey, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, and the entire family gathered to say goodbye. The Double K Ranch continued for generations after that, passed down from parents to children, expanding and contracting with the times but never disappearing. The main house remained largely unchanged, and visitors could still see the porch where Sam and Catherine had spent so many evenings, the kitchen where Catherine had first made biscuits that winter morning so long ago, the bedroom where their children had been born. But more than the physical place, what endured was the story, the tale of the mail-order bride who got off at the wrong station and found love with the cowboy who found her in the snow and said, "Come home." It became a family legend, told and retold to each new generation, a reminder that sometimes the best things in life came from mistakes and missed connections, from having the courage to change your plans when something better came along. And on cold winter nights, when the wind howled around the ranch house and snow piled high against the windows, the family would gather in the front room and someone would inevitably say, "Tell us again about how Grandmother Catherine and Grandfather Sam met." And the story would be told once more, a story of love and choice and the unexpected ways that fate could bring two people together. The Double K Ranch stood as a testament to what Catherine and Sam had built together, a legacy that was about more than land and cattle and horses. It was about family and love, and the quiet courage it took to build a life in an unforgiving landscape. It was about taking risks and trusting your heart and believing that home was not a place, but a person, a choice you made every single day. And somewhere, perhaps, in whatever comes after this life, Catherine and Sam were together still, sitting on a porch under a sky full of stars, holding hands and watching over the family they had created, the life they had shared, the love that had begun with a simple invitation spoken in the snow. Come home.